Okay. Hello, everyone. So welcome to the Worldwide Neurodevelopmental Series. My name is Stéphanie Bollac, and I'm replacing today Denis Jabodon to introduce with a great pleasure Rosa Cossa, our speaker of today. So I guess most of you know Rosa and her work, so I will just say a few words. So Rosa is since 2018 the director of INMED, the Institut de Neurobiologie de la Méditerranée in Marseille. It's a very nice institute located just above the Calanque. And so the work of Rosa and her team, she's mainly interested in the functional organization of neural networks with a focus on the hippocampus, which is hosts the memory, and is also involved in temporal lobe epilepsy. And she's one of the pioneers using two-photon calcium imaging coupled to electrophysiology to monitor the activity of large populations of cortical neurons. So very briefly, her career, she has obtained her PhD in biophysics in 2001 under the supervision of Christophe Bernard and Ezekiel Ben-Ari. And during her PhD, she has contributed to unravel the diversity of GABAergic neurons and their fate during epileptogenesis. She has then moved to New York to do her postdoc in the lab of Raphael Yuss, where she extended her work on cortical neural networks and developing the two-photon imaging of the neuronal activity. So back in France, she has obtained a tenure position. She has her own team, of course, at INMED, and she has pursued her research program, gaining at understanding the hippocampal function at circuit level, but also studying the maturation of circuits during postnatal development. So her team has made major discoveries, such as the existence of hub neurons, etc. And she will present most of this work and also new exciting data. Some of them are not published yet. So I think it's quite clear that her career is exceptional. She's internationally recognized as a leader in the field of optics applied to neuroscience. And in recognition of her work, she has obtained several prestigious prizes. And among the most recent, she obtained le Prix des Sciences de la Vie of the Bettencourt Foundation, the INSEM Research Prize, the Silver Medal of the CNRS. She has been funded twice by the ERC. So many things. I will stop here because I know she's very modest. So just one more thing. I mean, in addition to this outstanding work and career, I have to say that Rosa is really nice and friendly. And the only difficulty I have with her is to actually try to avoid crying our bluff when it is not appropriate during meetings. And that's really the main difficulty that we have. So I think, Rosa, now the floor is yours. Hopefully, we can manage all those technical issues that we just had. So you do the job. Okay.
Do you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I do not see you, but I hope you hear and understand me. It's such a pleasure to speak from Marseille to you all in different countries. I saw many highs in the chat. The picture behind the title of the talk is taken from the place where I guess I could have gone fishing much more easily than the Vieux-Port, since it's walking distance from the Institute. I'm just referring here to Denis' tweet about this talk. So today I will talk about how development sculpts memory circuits. I think it's really a fascinating question, and in fact it's been the question that has been inspiring research in my lab for several years. And the reason why I find this question really fascinating is the possibility that our memories, something that we all feel intimately associated with our own experience, our emotions, our sense of self, etc., may be in fact programmed partly during early development, even before any experience happens. So what I mean is maybe the way each of us will remember the what, the where, and the when of this talk would also depend on processes occurring while we were in our mother's womb. So why do I say that? well, we all know that our ability to remember is largely supported by the hippocampus, the region that has been the main focus of my lab, as Stephanie just said. And so in this talk, I will present evidence, both published and unpublished, that adult hippocampal cells and dynamics are remarkably sculpted by development, in fact, as early as embryonic neurogenesis. And I will argue that these primary developmental programs, again, happening even before active experience, provide a scaffold onto which later experience of the external world maybe can be somehow grafted and remembered. So before that, let me just, with this slide, emphasize the role of the hippocampus in memory. To me, the two most important discoveries about the role of the hippocampus in memory came from studying two different species several decades ago. On the left, you can see Brenda Milner, who in the early 50s, observed that the corrective surgery of the famous patient Henri Molaison left the patient without seizures, but unable to form new memories, and while he was able to record pre-surgery events. So her work really established that there are many multiple memory systems, and she really firmly established the importance of the medial temporal lobe and the hippocampus in particular in episodic memory. Then 2 decades later, John O'Keefe realized that the activity of the hippocampal pyramidal cells he was recording coded for the animal's current location, as you may catch from this experiment. He coined the word place cells. And so from this slide, you can understand that the hippocampus provides a cognitive map of space, allowing us to navigate through the world, but it is also used to travel across autobiographical events. Okay, so let's see. So this ability provided by the hippocampus to travel not only in space, but also in time, and form these ordered representations of visited locations or experience events is remarkably mirrored in hippocampal dynamics. Indeed, the hippocampus generates sequences of transient neuronal activation, like sequences of place cells, as schematized here. Sorry. In fact, so we know that hippocampal sequences can order all sorts of information. They can order spatial, but also non-spatial information in an allocentric or an idiothetic reference frame. These sequences can unfold at various temporal scale. And really, that's really, to me, the most beautiful and amazing thing about the hippocampus. It's really a structure which function is mirrored within its dynamics, as if it were made to produce sequences or to be a sequence generator. And I'm borrowing this expression from a recent review by Yuri Bujaki. Now, in fact, the ability to form sequences is almost intrinsically embedded within hippocampal circuits, as hippocampal activity can really self-organize into these chains, recurring chains of neuronal activation, even when external information is minimal, as illustrated here. So this is taken from work from my lab, using calcium imaging in mice running in the dark on a self-paced treadmill in the absence of any goal motivation, and again, in the absence of any salient external cue. We had shown that in the C1 region of the hippocampus, neurons really self-organize again into these recurring chains that are clearly visible in these heat maps. They repeat one after another within continuous run episodes. So this internal organization of hippocampal dynamics into sequences is remarkably stable. It is stable within continuous episodes. It is also stable across several days, as you may see here as well. Using chronic imaging, we were able to show that sequences could repeat involving almost the same cells in the same order from one day to the next. So what these findings reveal in a nutshell is that the hippocampus, or at least the CA1 region, hosts somehow an internally hardwired and remarkably rigid functional structure. Now, the idea of a hardwired structure producing sequences is further supported by the fact that hippocampal sequences are observed not only during experience, but also somehow offline when during quiet rest or sleep, when body and environment control over dynamics are really minimal. And this is indeed, these sequences reactivate, these sequences observed during experience reactivate in the same order within a few hundred milliseconds, associated with the occurrence of the so-called sharp wave ripple events that are the electrophysiological events that are really characteristic of the hippocampus and are a major phenomenon involved in memory processes. So this is the replay phenomenon. These reactivations have been shown by several labs to support the role of the hippocampus in memory. Again, it reveals to me how sequences are embedded within internal hippocampal dynamics following experience. But sequences may also may not be, in fact, entirely formed de novo following experience, as they have been also reported to occur prior to experience, and this is the pre-play phenomenon. This was reported by Dragoi, Tonegawa, and others before experience. So the pre-play phenomenon is the observation of place cell sequences, for example, during sleep prior to experience. So it again provides evidence of pre-existing sequences that may be rapidly selected to track experience and form novel representations. So in other words, what I wanted to say here in these few slides is that these hippocampal sequences that are really an indicator of hippocampal function, if I can say that, may originate from a pre-configured set of sequences wired prior to experience, which from a developmental perspective, I find quite fascinating. Now, a few years ago in my lab, and this is published, we have been able to image using 2-photon calcium microscopy the functional structure of these sequences occurring during rest together with sharp wave ripples. And we were able to reveal with calcium imaging the reactivation in the forward or backward order as shown in this raster plot. And very importantly, what we had shown is that reactivations always corresponded to a peak or a synchronous calcium events, SCE, as shown in this example raster plot. So this again is a heat map showing the activity of individual neurons as a function of time. So most importantly, what we found when sorting these events based on how similar were the sets of neurons they recruited, we found that most of them involved these what we called functionally orthogonal assemblies that appear as these white blocks on this raster plot taken from real data. These assemblies are these groups of about 10 neurons, coactive several times, scattered in the CA1 pyramidal layer, and again, repeatedly activated during synchronous calcium events. In other words, sequences that are this major functional motif of hippocampal function are formed by chains of assembly activation. Now, like sequences, assemblies are remarkably stable. This is unpublished. Over time, as indicated by this new set of data, imaging the same set of neurons for several days, up to 2 weeks. And we were able to see, you can see from this raster plot, how the assemblies found on day 1 in white are still the same on day 2. So this is the red blocks. And they occur in the absence of cues and maybe to me, the equivalent of cortical columns. So in some sequences of neuronal activation are produced by specific functional connectivity schemes, which are partly pre-wired in the form of these small assemblies. Now, I would like to convince you that such basic pre-wiring supporting hippocampal function in the adult may partly originate throughout the construction of hippocampal circuits during development. In fact, before that, I just want to say in a few slides how recent work is really pointing at showing many traces of early development in the final wiring diagram. Oui? Yes? Yes? Oui, je t'entends.
We have a problem, we don't see your slides anymore.
Oh.
Can you
okay.
Sorry guys, for this problem.
Okay.
So you unfortunately,
I'll do it again. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see.
Movement.
Attends, just one sec. Share screen. That's fine. Up. So when did you stop seeing my slides?
Okay, now it's good. It's been a few. It's been yeah, 3 minutes maybe.
3 minutes. Okay. Sorry about that. So what I was saying. So these, it's okay. It's good that you see this slide because I think it really makes the point I wanted to make. So what I wanted to say is that when we look at the organization of activity in the adult CA1, we see these quite pretty stable functional building blocks in the form of small assemblies, stable over time, stable across several days of imaging. And we believe that this is an indication of a very strong predetermination in the functional organization of the adult hippocampus. Now, I wanted also to say that there are traces of development even when we look at the diversity of hippocampal cell types. And this is just a slide to tell you that I hope you see it now. I'm a little bit nervous. So like all cortical regions, the hippocampus, as you know, comprises two major cell types, excitatory glutamatergic neurons and inhibitory GABAergic neurons that are represented here in these drawings. So the excitatory glutamatergic neurons, which look really like almost an army of identical twins in these early drawings by Golgi, and the diverse population of inhibitory neurons, the apparent lack of diversity of excitatory principal neurons is really misleading. And in fact, there is a lot of recent work indicating a tremendous heterogeneity, almost comparable to that of interneurons. Let me show you why I think this diversity is partly rooted in the developmental origin of both cells. So there is, in fact, a handful of early autoradiographic studies that are listed here that have shown that principal cells of the hippocampus distribute along the three main axes of the hippocampus, the main anatomical axes of the hippocampus, according to when they are born. The birth date of glutamatergic cells in the hippocampus spans in rodents roughly between E12.5 and birth. And in CA1, early born cells will tend to distribute in the distal part of CA1 and in the deep positions of the radial axis, while later born cells will be located more proximally and in the superficial parts of the radial axis of the CA1 pyramidal layer. This is something you can see with more recent data using genetic fate mapping approaches in my lab that enable permanent labeling of cells according to when they are born. We were also able to reproduce these early findings here namely that cells born at E14.5 locate in the deep part of the CA1 pyramidal layer, whereas cells located superficially are are born later at E16.5. So in other words, in CA1, the radial and transverse hippocampal axes reflect the temporal order of principal cell neurogenesis. Now, most importantly, by reviewing quite recent literature, one can also understand how these temporal axes also match the patterning of principal cell diversity as illustrated in this table. I'm not going to go through this table. The main point here I want to make is that really diversity in physiology, in morphology, connectivity, and function really mirrors the presumed date of birth of CA1 principal neurons. And it's, for example, quite striking if you think about function. For example, putative early-born CA1 pyramidal layers, CA1 principal neurons will tend to display multiple place fields, so a more poor information content than presumably later-born cells located in the proximal part of the CA1 pyramidal layer and more superficially. So the same is true. So in other words, what I wanted to say here by reviewing recent literature is that I want to put forward the idea that neuronal birth dates, so the time of final cell division, as predicted again in CA1 from final soma position, most likely acts as a segregating factor of principal cell diversity. This is something that also applies to GABAergic neurons, and I don't have time to show this here. So altogether, the aim of that introductory part was to provide an overview of the framework motivating our studies in the developing hippocampus. So what I've told you is that the hippocampus, so the brain region that enables us to remember events of our life in the adult, is a brain structure that produces sequences of cell assembly activation using a rather rigid functional structure that may originate from early development, given the fact that when we look at hippocampal cell diversity, for example, diversity even in function, we see traces of early embryonic origin. So the main question I'm going to try start addressing today is whether development indeed shapes this internal organization of hippocampal dynamics. So to do that, we used calcium imaging, and so this is work addressed by this really fantastic trio in my lab. Michel Picardo, who is a young PI in the lab, with his student, Robin Dard, who is an experimentalist and who is really as a very talented PhD student, able to place a small window on the top of the CA1 region of very tiny cells, okay. And Julien Dedi, who is not only a child neurologist, but also a very talented in data science and really at extracting data from these large data sets. So what they've been doing is performed imaging at various postnatal time points in CA1, and they looked at the organization of activity. I just want to share with you this movie in the right, where you may see the CA1 region from the dorsal to the more ventral part of CA1. We are here in the stratum oriens, and most of what I'm going to tell you about happens in the pyramidal layer that you see here. So with calcium imaging, we are able to catch the activity of thousands of neurons at the same time. Okay, and sometimes they are able to produce longitudinal movies. So this is an example of that, where you can track the behavior of the same cell across several consecutive days. This is an example in the stratum oriens. And you can see that we can image as deep as the stratum radiatum. Okay, so what kind of dynamics do we see at early postnatal stages of CA1 development? So, So the first thing, so for that, we needed really to produce a toolbox that enables us to extract, to infer neuronal activity from calcium imaging data sets. So this toolbox is just published and it's available on GitLab. And so what you can see from this slide is really I think it's quite obvious, the sparsification of activity that occurs between P5 and adulthood. So there are fewer neurons active in the adult, but also we lose these recurring synchronizations, these synchronous events that are really characteristic of most developing brain structures. And so it's also not so surprising that we find it in vivo in the developing CA1. So what you don't catch with your eyes is this amazing link between activity, spontaneous activity, and movement. This is something that has been already described using electrophysiological approaches by the lab of Mark Bloomberg, for example, and also more recently in this great paper by my colleagues Pierre-Pascal Lenk-Santini and Rustem Kazipov. So the type of movements I'm talking and referring to are these spontaneous twitches that you may see here in this movie. This is a little rat pup. So these movements are typical. They are observed in rats, in mice as well, and also in preterm human babies, where we know they contribute to the development of cortical or functional cortical maps. Now, we observe them also using imaging approaches, and what we found particularly striking is this switch in the relationship between these spontaneous movements or twitches and coordination of activity in CA1. So if you look at these histograms plotting the fraction of active cells centered on the occurrence of these twitches, so you please take into account the fact that we are really pulling a lot of data here, so over 1,000 twitches, for example, in this case, from 7 mouse pups aged between P5 and P6. So what you may see here is really that as the twitches are followed by a peak in the fraction of coactive neurons. It's something that we still observe towards the end of the first postnatal week, but when past the end of the first postnatal week, there is almost an inversion in the relationship between twitches and coactivity in CA1. So we like to call this phenomenon by which spontaneous activity almost detaches from this spontaneous sensory motor inputs, the internalization of CA1 hippocampal dynamics. This internalization is quite visible as well in these plots, plotting the, I don't know why this is, sorry, plotting the fraction, the distribution of activating or inhibiting twitches, so twitches followed by an activation of CA1 neurons or twitches followed by an inhibition of CA1 neurons. You can see how around the end of the first postnatal week, many more twitches are inhibiting CA1 dynamics, while before most twitches are activating CA1 neurons. Okay, so what could be the mechanism supporting this internalization, if you allow me this terminology? So one obvious possibility could involve GABAergic circuits, since these happen to really mature around that period, so around the end of the first postnatal week. So we have used mice in which GABA neurons are visible and distinguished by the expression of TD tomato, as shown here, while all neurons express the calcium indicator JCAMP. So at P5, 6, you can see here on these histograms, plotting the fraction of coactive GABA neurons, that again, the same phenomenon is true for interneurons, namely that twitches are followed by a synchronization of interneurons. But the picture is different past the end of the first postnatal week. So whereas principal neurons are inhibited by twitches at the end of the first postnatal week, interneurons remain activated by spontaneous twitches past that period. So in other words, the one possibility could be that this slight decrease in activity following twitches at P9 and later, could reflect the emergence of a functional inhibition. So this is something we looked at more carefully, and indeed the end of the first postnatal week is really a milestone in the structural and functional plasticity of GABA circuits, and in particular in the emergence of the perisomatic GABAergic axonal coverage. This is something we had already described in the developing barrel cortex. It's really clearly visible on these movies, where JCAMP expression is restricted to the axonal part of GABAergic cells. We are here imaging in the CA1 pyramidal layer, here at P5 and here after P9. And you can see that whereas at P5 there are barely any axons active, the picture is completely different past the end of the first postnatal week. And we can really see this active honeycomb-like domains around the somata of glutamatergic neurons. So this rise in active axons could reflect an increase in activity of perisomatic GABAergic neurons, or even just the emergence of the perisomatic GABAergic coverage from the anatomical side. And this is indeed quite possible. In fact, early light microscopy studies from the lab of Constantino Sotelo or Tamás Freund had already observed that really around the end of the first postnatal week, there is a surge in this perisomatic GABAergic coverage in the CA1 pyramidal layer. I think there is around 6 times more signal against the vesicular inhibitory amino acid transporter at P21 than at P7. And so Agnès Baud, a very talented neuroanatomist in my lab, has re-examined this issue, really focusing around P7, and what she found is indeed that within a few days between P5-6 and P7-8, there is a significant rise in the intensity of labeling for perisomatic GABAergic axons. So in other words, there is really an abrupt development of perisomatic GABAergic inhibition. So to conclude on this first set of experiments, zooming on this early postnatal week of development, I would like to say that the end of the first postnatal week in mice is an important period in the functional wiring of CA1 hippocampal dynamics, with the sudden disconnection from sensory motor inputs, paralleled by the emergence of local perisomatic GABAergic activity. This early postnatal period and this first postnatal week is also the time when a specific functional subtype of GABA circuit emerges that we had described in slices a long time ago now with my colleague Paolo Bonifazi and Miri Goldin. Those are these major functional subtypes of GABA neurons are the so-called GABA hub neurons. And we call them like that because of their exceptional functional connectivity degree. As you'll see in a couple of slides, we think that hub cells may be really the critical entry point between external sensory inputs and local the activity-dependent maturation of local circuits. So this slide is really summarizing many years of work on hub neurons. I just want to say a few words. So as I said, hub cells have a high functional connectivity degree as established by computing pairwise correlations of calcium activation onsets in slices. They are these rare and sparse red cells in this contour map. They are sparse, but due to their exceptional axonal spread, they are able to have a strong impact on network dynamics as measured in the interval between GDPs. This is again done in slices. Most importantly, in collaboration with my friend and colleague Gord Fischel, we were able to trace the origin of these cells to the earliest stages of GABA neurogenesis. So, as I said, this was all done in vitro. Now, given the role of external inputs, sensory inputs in shaping local hippocampal circuits early in development, I think it's quite legitimate to probe the existence of hub cells in vivo. And so I'm gonna, so this is something that we have done, but in the barrel cortex. So if you allow me to leave the hippocampus for just 2 slides and just share with you these recent results obtained by this fantastic trio, Laura Modol, who was a postdoc in my lab, together with Yannick Bollmann, a PhD student, and Thomas Tressard, what they, in a fruitful collaboration with the Valentina Emiliani's lab, they were able to see, so again, they computed functional connectivity in the same way as what we had done in slices in the barrel cortex, and were able to see that around the end of the first postnatal week, again, always the same critical turn point, they saw the emergence of these highly connected functional nodes, as visible here. So these are graphs. They are graphs plotting the largest connected component. So every cell here is connected to at least one cell in the network, and you can see that how different the situation is between P5 and P7, and this is quantified here. Most importantly, what they found is that hub cells or highly connected cells were more tended to be more frequently involving GABAergic cells. There is a much higher probability to find highly connected GABA cells than highly connected glutamatergic cells. Okay, so what Laura and Yannick have done is that they probe the impact of these highly connected GABA hub cells on ongoing network dynamics in vivo using different driver mouse lines. I'm just showing here a movie illustrating the impact of stimulating with light. So we use holographic photostimulation. Cells, GABA cells are all expressing this fast redshifted opsin produced in Hillel Adesnik's lab. And we are so imaging the ongoing activity. You can see at the beginning these recurring synchronizations that were also observed in CA1. Cells are getting brighter in a recurring manner. And in a minute, we will target with our laser only this little cell that was identified as a hub cell. And you will see here, so those are the stimulation artifacts, and we are stimulating only that cell. And I think you can even just, with your eyes, catch the impact of this single neuron on ongoing dynamics. So there is really a dampening of network synchronization that will be released almost as soon as we stop stimulating the hub cell. This is quantified also here. This is quantified here, sorry. So you can see here the significant effect of stimulation. As I said, and of course this still needs to be proven in the hippocampus, hub neurons may provide a critical link between sensory inputs and local networks. And I'm illustrating, the reason why I think this may be the case is because of these experiments. On the first type of experiments, we've been stimulating the whiskers while imaging the response of individual neurons to the whisker stimulation in the barrel cortex. And what we found is that the cells that were more likely to respond to stimulation were the cells identified as candidate hub cells, so cells that displayed an exceptional functional connectivity degree, as you can see from these calcium fluorescence traces. Now, what Laura and Yannick have also done is to deprive the mouse pups from the whiskers by plucking the whiskers during the first few days following birth. And what they observed was pretty striking. They found that the emergence of these highly connected nodes was impaired in the deprived pups, and this is quantified here. So this is a very, very strong and striking phenomenon. Okay, so to summarize this second part, I've told you that the first postnatal week, sorry, is the time when of major changes in the organization of local CA1 circuits, with the loss of movement-triggered synchrony, the emergence of perisomatic GABAergic inhibition, and of highly connected GABA hub cells, which may provide a link between sensory inputs and local circuits. Now, in the rest of my talk, I would like to show you how these early events leave a permanent trace or permanent stain in the adult hippocampal networks. And I will use the example of early-born GABA cells to illustrate this point. So, as I told you a few slides ago, we have been able, together with Gord, to track the origin of hub cells to the earliest stages of GABA neurogenesis and label them permanently using a method, Mouseline, that we have previously published. And so what we've done recently is to track the fate of these cells in the adult CA1. So we are leaving the early postnatal stage and moving to the adult hippocampus. And this is the work of Marco Boccio, an amazing postdoc in my lab, together with Claire Gouni, who just graduated. And this was published just last week. So the first thing we found is that early-born GABA hub cells displayed really characteristic morphological and physiological feature as illustrated in this slide. I'm not going to go through the details, just tell you that those early-born GABA cells express markers indicative of a long-range subtype of GABAergic neurons targeting extrahippocampal regions such as the medial septum, as shown here. And so they express somatostatin, for example, at a quite high proportion. They also have characteristic intrinsic physiological features, including this lower excitability in response to these large pulses of current as measured in current lamp recordings, and as shown here. They also develop specific connectivity schemes, both regarding their integration into glutamatergic and GABAergic networks. I'm only illustrating here part of the data. The take-home message here is that early-born GABA hub cells in the adult CA1 are wired in a way that should favor their activation by local assemblies. Indeed, they tend to receive as many local excitatory glutamatergic inputs as other interneurons. I'm not showing that, but they receive fewer local inhibitory inputs, as shown using immunohistochemical methods, for example, staining against PV. We saw that there were fewer putative PV contacts onto early-born GABA cells, here in green, compared to their control partners. And this was also true when looking at the spontaneous and evoked iPSCs these cells received, as measured in voltage clamp mode at the reversal potential for glutamatergic events, and as quantified here. So early-born GABA neurons are less inhibited locally, but also receive fewer long-range excitatory inputs than a typical CA1 interneuron, as shown in this quite extreme example. So this is something we measured using optogenetic approaches by expressing an opsin in the candidate regions impinging onto CA1, such as the entorhinal cortex or the ventromedial thalamus. And you can see on this example how a typical interneuron would respond with an EPSC to the light stimulation, whereas for early-born GABA cells, very often there is no response to entorhinal cortex stimulation or to thalamus stimulation. So they receive local excitation, but they are not as excited by long-range excitatory inputs, and they are less inhibited than their local partners. Okay. this lower PV innervation is shared with their early-born glutamatergic partners. And this is really a striking phenomenon that I would like to share with you. So I'm using this slide illustrating recent work performed by Davide Cavalieri, a very talented PhD student in my lab. So I want to say a few words about how birth date also critically determines the fate of CA1 glutamatergic neurons. So Davide has compared the soma position and morphophysiology of CA1 glutamatergic neurons according to their birth date, and he examined 3 age groups, E12.5, E14.5, and E16.5, using the same mouse line as published, as we had published few years ago, many years ago now, by Thomas Marissal et al. So he examined, and so the important thing that he first found is that soma position is in fact maybe not the best proxy of birth date, as shown in this cartoon and as quantified here. Indeed, it seems that whereas cells born at E14.5 indeed tend to locate in the deep part of the radial axis of CA1, whereas cells born later at E16.5 are located closer to the stratum radiatum, the E12.5 cells break this rule. They are almost evenly dispersed along the radial axis. They can be found close to the stratum oriens or close to the stratum radiatum. They are not located only deep in the CA1 pyramidal layer. Now, they also break the rule of PV innervation, if I can say that. So as reported previously by Ivan Soltes and others, we found that cells located deep in the CA1 pyramidal region tended to receive more PV innervation than cells located more superficially along the radial axis, and this is quantified here. But E12.5 born glutamatergic neurons, like early born GABA hub cells, receive fewer PV contacts even when they are located close to the stratum oriens. So they are really breaking. They are very exceptional. And quite strikingly, they are exceptional in similar ways. No matter whether they are GABAergic or glutamatergic, early born cells share common properties such as these less inhibition, if I can say that like that, and also this lower excitability that I had described for EB GABA cells. The same is true for EB glutamatergic neurons. They tend to fire less in response to these long depolarizing pulses. So really, it seems that delays in maturation originating from different birth dates remain somehow frozen in the adult CA1. So there is really a permanent stain of adult birth date. So to finish, we wanted to see how this specific temporal origin reflects in the function of early born GABA cells. And to do that, we have been, Marco and Claire, imaged early born GABA neurons together with the CA1 population dynamics using a red shifted calcium indicator. So you can see here from this example image that how few of these cells one can find in the CA1 pyramidal layer. So these have been extremely challenging experiments. So hub cells, like many other cells, tend to be activated during locomotion, as shown in this example raster plot. So the activity of EB GABAs is here indicated in green. They are also activated during synchronous calcium events, as you can see here in this raster plot. And they are more likely to be activated by locomotion and synchronous calcium events than other cells. So they are quite remarkable in their activation dynamics. Most interestingly, they are remarkably correlated with assembly activity, as you can see here, during rest, as shown in this example. So this is an example where 7 significant assemblies were detected and color-coded. And you can see here the mean cross-correlogram between EB GABA spike counts and assembly activity. And you see that most EB-GABAs tend to be significantly recruited around mean cell assembly activity, a proportion that is really significantly higher than control cells. And overall, the majority of EB-GABA cells tend to be really activated by locomotion and, sorry about that, here. There is a high fraction of EB-GABAs that display this combined modulation by locomotion and assembly activity, a proportion really that is 7 times higher than the proportion among random cells. So this suggests that EB-GABAs really constitute an important node of the hippocampal circuit, since they integrate both locomotion and population synchrony signals. So finally, we asked whether they exhibited distinct functional connectivity schemes even in the adult networks. And for that, we analyzed functional connectivity in a subset of field of views imaged in the stratum pyramidale and calculated, as we had done previously, the functional connectivity as done in developing networks. And what we found is that even if the connectivity of EB-GABAs was variable, as a population, they connected to a significantly larger fraction of cells than expected by chance. And in line with this, they, in fact, I think it's exactly 1/3 of EB-GABA cells could be defined as hub cells, whereas the proportion was smaller among other cells. So to conclude this last part, I've shown you with these fate mapping experiments that early-born hub neurons retain exceptional feature, including a high connectivity, which really binds them to local assemblies, and this really makes them unique. They are unique, but they share many remarkable connectivity schemes and intrinsic properties with their early-born glutamatergic partners, which do not have such prominent network function. So I'm almost done. I'd like to really conclude, to wrap up this talk with these quite speculative slides and a list of open questions. So given what we know about the development of the hippocampus and really the permanent marks it leaves in the adult, I would like to propose that the developmental period occurring before the end of the first postnatal week and the start of active sensory experience is really critical in many ways. It is likely to contribute to the construction of an internal model of the body, the first step in a developmental sequence before the emergence of an internal model of the world and maybe even experience-dependent adaptive dynamics. The reason why I'm saying that is first because there is this amazing link between CA1 dynamics and spontaneous sensory motor activity, and also because the second postnatal week is really the time when an internal representation in the form of place cells emerges, and this is recent work performed by many labs. So only once these two first steps are complete can really experience-dependent dynamics be observed. So there are obviously many open questions, in particular regarding assemblies, when and how these internal assemblies emerge, whether they are like cortical columns, whether they are shaped by early ontogenesis, and the role of hub cells in all these. Maybe our idea is that hub cells are likely to be really important during the second postnatal week, since they start emerging at P7 and they are receiving sensory inputs, at least in the hippocampal cortex. So the title of my talk, in fact, really still remains an open question. Okay, so this is the end. I'd like to thank again the fantastic members of my lab. They've been great even during the lockdown. They've been always very active and present. I'm really lucky to have them. I'd like to thank also funding agencies, collaborators, and you for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Rosa, for this wonderful talk.
Okay, close. Okay, we're back.
Good. Very nice. Thank you. So, are you ready for some questions?
Sure. Sure.
First question. Your slides are gone. I think we answered this, right? Okay. So, first, the real question. What is the birth date of hippocampal hub neurons? If it is E7.5, let's recall that this is neuronal stage. It is much earlier than subpallial and cortical interneuron neurogenesis.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry, I've been using, so we don't really, what we know is that early born GABA hub cells are born before E10. We have done some short term fate mapping experiments to really see when they start leaving the ganglionic eminences and towards the hippocampus. Now, the reason why I use E7.5 is the time when we give tamoxifen to the pregnant mice to label the cells. And we think this is obviously very early, but there is tamoxifen remaining in the embryo, and that's the way we label the cells. So it's more E7.5 is a more methodological time point than a real birth date for early born GABA hub cells.
Okay. Next question. If one could increase the rate of neurogenesis at at E12, could we increase the number of hub cells? And what would you predict as a consequence? Or is it the number of hub neurons restrained by the system?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating question. We don't know. And in fact, behind this question, there is the idea of really whether hub cells are really specified or whether they are just the first cells to be born and they acquire these remarkable features because they are the first cells to be born and to populate the developing hippocampus. So that's, we don't know. I mean, those are experiments that start be feasible, and I hope we'll be able to get them in the near future.
Okay. Next question. Oh, I see that we have the name of the person asking
I
the
don't
question.
see
So this is a question from
okay.
This is a question from Natalia De Marco. Hi Rosa, great talk. Do hub neurons integrate into adult networks if the mouse underwent sensory deprivation during the first postnatal week? Does the internalization of the hippocampal sequences involve competition of afferent inputs on two hubs, sensory versus recurrent or / internal?
I mean, again, that's a great question, and it's something we should look at. I think the first thing we need to see is whether hub cells are also present in the hippocampus at around P7. As I said, I hope this was clear. What I've shown in vivo was in the barrel cortex. The question is easier to address in the barrel cortex. We don't know. But it's a possibility.
Okay. A question from Ayano Matsushima. Is high connectivity of Hip GABAergic cells explainable by migratory pathway of them? Do early-born glutamatergic cells, which share a common feature with Hip GABAergic cells, also exhibit propensity to be hub in the network? How the cells can be the hub with less local inhibitory inputs? Do you want me to go?
Yeah, well, whether the glutamatergic cells, when we probed their functional impact by stimulating them with light specifically, we were not able to observe the same major impact as highly connected GABA cells. So that's true. What we see is that for glutamatergic cells to be impact on network dynamics, we need to stimulate many of them. In fact, they tend to work more as assemblies. So a single glutamatergic neuron is not affecting network dynamics. They operate in small groups. So that's one first thing. About the migration of the cells, so I'm not sure I understand what was the idea that was given the question.
Do you want me to repeat it?
Yeah, please.
The last one? So, how the cells can be the hub with less local inhibitory inputs. That was the last one. And the migration is high connectivity of hip GABAergic cells explainable by migratory pathway of them. Do early born glutamatergic cells, which share common feature with hip GABAergic cells, also exhibit propensity to be hub in the network?
Yeah, so I think the last part of the question I had addressed it. So now about the first part was why?
Sorry. The first one?
Yeah.
Is high connectivity of.
Yeah. Why? How they can be hubs? Sorry. Why they can be hubs even if they have low inhibitory inputs? That's the.
Right. That's the last one. Yeah.
Yeah, but in a way, I mean, my interpretation is that those cells are more driven by assemblies. That's why their activation is bound to assembly activation. So they are probably receiving, I mean, this is something we obviously need to look at more specifically, but they are most likely to be receiving common inputs from similar CA1 glutamatergic assemblies, so located locally. And that's how they are hubs. They integrate this input. Now, how they impact on local dynamics is still an open question. I guess what this person has in mind is the fact that these cells are inhibitory. Therefore, we do not expect them to synchronize or coordinate. But there are many examples of inhibitory transmission synchronizing activity. So that's, I think, probably what's going to happen for headset.
Okay. So one more question from Antoine Madar. Is there theoretical work providing a mechanistic model of how hub interneurons could orchestrate CA1 sequences and anchor CA1 activity to sensory experience? How does it relate to the attractor network's theory of place fields emergence?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And again, I hope that our data can really fuel and feed computational neuroscientists to make predictions about how these hub cells integrating in the picture. It's known, for example, that one very simple model that can produce sequences is a network of connected glutamatergic neurons receiving global inhibition. So in a way, hub cells could be those cells providing global inhibition and enabling this motif that was shown in computational experiments, computational simulations to produce sequences. So yeah, they could, we still don't know whether they are actively involved in producing the sequences or whether their activation is unrelated to sequential activation.
Okay. I think we're done.
Okay.
Unless there's a last question, no more? Okay, well, you did great. Bravo. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And
bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you
Nice
next Thursday then.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Ciao.